Welcome,
Thank you.
welcome. See if we can, Lauren's going to get us side by side here. There we are. CB is an AAT grad calling in from Georgia. So she's a couple hours from me because, I'm in Sweet Home, Alabama. And CB, what class were you in?
I was in, it was in January of 21. So I'm trying to think. It was 12, I think. Okay. No, that's not right. It doesn't matter. I'm forgetting right now. I should have done that off the top.
Yeah.
But, the participation has been so much. And now that I've done so many, you forget. Like, you just feel like you're a part of an overall AAT community.
Yeah. But you gave us when you took it. So that was a while ago.
It was 9. It was number 9. Now that I think about it, it was number 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. They got to meet Rose this morning, and Rose was number 8. She was class 8. So, yeah. I asked CB to join us because I would like for you, CB, to talk about what even got you interested in this stuff, how you were led to this class, and how we met. And then also CB has a son in spirit. So I'd like for you to talk a little bit about your sweetie who's in heaven. And then how this, especially the 12 phases and everything that you learned from that, what you've been through in the last several years and how that played an integral role in that. So,
all right.
Please share all that with us. She's in the car because she's between parties, you guys.
It's spring. There's a lot going on. But I feel very honored and truly blessed to be here. I have been in your shoes, every single one of them, and had a feeling of what in the world am I getting myself into? And wondering, how will this ever come? How will it really happen? And I'm here to tell you that it will come for you. It will come for you. You just have to open and be practicing. I grew up very religious. This is my natural background. And then in 2015, my beautiful baby boy at the age of 23, David, transitioned and left me devastated. And while I did have a very good foundation of religion to give me some comfort, it wasn't enough for me. And I had people in my life who saw me suffering. And one beautiful person in particular was my different son's mother-in-law. And her name was Candy. And Candy had a really good friend who is a medium. And Candy said to me, a little reluctantly, a little shyly, I know someone who might be able to bring you some peace. And I was just desperate, y'all. I was desperate for that peace. And so I actually went into, this lady's name was Robin, and I went to her home. And in the first 90 seconds, she described my David to a T and described him working on a piece of furniture. She couldn't have known this in any way, shape, or form. I just started weeping. And I ended up spending 3 hours with her and met all manner of my loved ones. And it was mind-blowing. So I left that experience changed and searching, but I didn't really know what else to do with it. So each year on David's Angelversary, I would have a conversation with her. And during COVID, my husband had just lost his mother and his father, and he kept having these weird dreams where he would see his mom in the middle of the night calling out to him. So I said, we've got to talk to Robin. So we got Robin on the phone. It was a beautiful, amazing experience. And within hours of that phone call, she sent me a text message. And she said, I haven't read this book, but I'm being led to tell you to read a book called Angelic Attendants, What Happens when we're in the, I forget the exact title now, but and she said, it's by Julie Ryan. And I said, okay, I'm going to read it. So I downloaded it, inhaled it in a 3-hour, my husband and I both listened to it, inhaled it. And I was just like, wow, I mean, it just blew everything wide open for me to know that David was not just chattable with a medium, but I could talk to him. I could have that relationship with him and others. And I looked at my husband and I said, the next time we know somebody's on their way out, we're going to reach out to this lady. Well, I had no idea that just a few months later, it would be my own mother. So in August of that year, I went and became Mom's full-time caregiver, and as she was getting and put into hospice in her home. And I pulled Julie's Audible book back out, and I listened to it twice in the first day that I was sitting with my mom. And I went on Julie's website, and I was like, I really want to work with her. And my husband was like, just do it. We're not going to tell anybody because we wouldn't have had a lot of support for it, but just do it. Well, she was booked out, as you all know, way in advance. So I went to the contact me, and I just simply wrote, and I explained that my mom was dying and that I really wanted an appointment, but she was booked up. I said, if somebody could just reach out to me if you have a cancellation. Well, I let it go. I was like, God, you know what I need. So about 12 hours later, my cell phone rings and I answer, and Phoebe, yes, this is Julie Ryan. I was just like, she had gotten my email and she said, Spirit just led her to call me. So beautiful, beautiful experience over the next 5 weeks. Ooh, Julie and I spoke and text messaged as my mom went through the various phases. And Julie guided me multiple times, helping Mom do the walk to heaven, which y'all may or may not have done yet.
They haven't yet, but they will. They will.
Okay. And it was such a beautiful gift to me and to my mom. Now, my mom was oblivious that I was having the conversation, and that she was being watched, for lack of a better word, or observed as the angels were coming in and the phases were changing. So the 12 phases, I think Mom was at like a 6 when you and I first talked. And then each day, not each day, but there were changes each day. And it took 5 weeks to get to the end. But as things were happening, Julie would say, be on the lookout for at this phase and at this phase. And I would go up and sit with Mom and watch her seeing spirits of her aunts and her parents and her other relatives. And in fact, there was one conversation where she said, there's a little girl right here. There's a little girl right here. Well, turns out my very first pregnancy was an ectopic pregnancy that I miscarried. And that child in spirit was supposed to be named Catherine and was going to be called Katie. And she has made herself known to Julie and others as Kate. So Kate was presenting herself. A child I never even got to have in my arms was presenting at my mom's bedside when Mom was suffering. And Kate got messages to me that she was sitting there when I needed to sleep. And it was just beautiful. But during the last day, when we knew she was almost gone, watching Mom lay there, I was able to, even before I had the class, because I had not signed up for the class at this point, I was just signed up to have Julie beautifully hold my hand as we went through the process. I was seeing things happen in my mom's room on her deathbed. The wings were at the back of her on either side, and just the swirl was happening. And as she slipped away, I messaged Julie and I said, she's gone. And Julie was like, I can see. She is the vortex, the wings, the everything. It was the most amazing experience that made what could have been, should have been one of the saddest days of my life, gave me great joy knowing that she wasn't leaving alone. Like, the room was just packed with the spirit. And it was just such a blessed event. And shortly after Mom passed, my husband said, you need to take this class. So I signed up and I took the class, and it was just an amazing experience. And since then, I have had the real privilege of sitting with several additional loved ones. I actually lost 5 people since Mom. And sitting there with them and being able to experience the angels and the loved ones around, and just sensing the leading of the spirit up through the vortex. It's just such an incredible experience. I am so grateful to know, especially because my son's death was traumatic, and mom's death was peaceful, but learning that they all go the same, we all go, all the spirits leave the body the same way, into nothing but love, no pain, no anguish, none of that. As my mom laid there and her physical being was in pain, and I, because this was before I took the class, I was worried. And Julie and I did the automatic review of her passing, and mom shared that there was no pain for mom. Like, mom was watching me be sad to see her suffering, but she gave me clear message that she did not suffer at all. And it is just such a beautiful gift to have the knowledge that those phases happen, and the loved ones come in, and the angels come in, and that at that last moment, it's nothing but pure bliss and pure joy as they leave the earthly meat sack to go and rejoin, which is all one, just source, all the oneness of rejoining. So that is my experience with the 12 phases. And I've continued. Just so Candy, who introduced me to my first medium, she passed in August, and I was blessed to her bedside, holding her hands. And she looked right at me, because she knew that my life was ever changed because of her being willing to speak to me about Robin. And we communicated telepathically as she laid there on her deathbed. And I just kept telling her, you know, it's going to be beautiful. And she's like, I know. It was just the most magical experience. And I was in the room by myself. All the family was out. But again, to see the vortex and the angel wings, and just to see it happen, I mean, it's just gorgeous. It's just beautiful. I will say that in order to get to the point where I've been able to enjoy the blessings of all that Julie has to teach, is you've probably already talked about the practice session that we have available to all the graduates. And I'm blessed to get on usually about 3 times a week, but practicing with each other and being able to tap into each other's gifts and lead each other. I mean, it is just so amazing. There was even this, just a couple of days ago, we had a practice session, and we were working on with a gal who has a family situation where there's 3 people. And as I was in we were all meditating together, trying to bring healing, or not trying, we were all doing our energetic healing that we are all gifted. We're all gifted with it. And in my mind's eye, I was seeing triangles encapsulate, and then these circles encapsulate, and the dippity-doo gel and all of that. And somebody else spoke before I did. And before I even got a chance to say anything, Julie, who's just phenomenal, Jerry said, I'm seeing all 3 of them with triangles around them and circles and all this glittery stuff. And I was just like, I mean, if nothing else, and that's not even the right statement, the group sessions together give you so much affirmation for what you're seeing and what you're experiencing, and being able to lift each other up in your skills. And nobody has to be, and you can sit there and be quiet and just take it in. We have a couple of people that mostly do that. And that's okay too. It is such a safe space, because there are times when I have things to say and nobody else got the same thing. And I'm like, that's okay. You know, that was my experience today. So it is a totally safe space, and I encourage all to participate as much as they can. So,
well, and you bring up a really good point, which is there's no right or wrong with this.
Right.
It's what
right.
do you bring in? What's your perspective? And we're going to talk more about that throughout this weekend, but it's all correct. You can't get this wrong. You can't.
Right.
It's not possible. And everybody's going to get information in different ways. Some of us are visual learners, some of us are kinesthetic learners or audio learners, and we're going to talk more about that as well. Tell us about, CB was a pastor's wife for a long time in her first marriage, and tell us about how this has integrated with your faith. You brought up that you came from a religious background, and I mean, she was a pastor's wife, so that's a serious religious background. So tell us how that's integrated together.
Well, so truthfully, it, in a lot of ways, those beliefs that I grew up with, and certainly being a pastor's wife for 10 years, has caused limiting beliefs to occur. And listening to, I'm assuming they all have access to your meditations and stuff, has really helped me to release, because as humanity, especially in the last several hundred years, and especially as the church comes in and has done all of its stuff to control how it all goes, for me, that has been something I've really had to work with, to release those limiting beliefs so that I can be completely open to all that God is. We are God. I am. You are. We are all one of the fabric that is all woven together. And to really release and relinquish the chains for me of the my experience has just been huge. And every time I think there's something else that is going to limit, in my experience for the last 3 years, I'm like, oh, I can't really do that because of, and when I relinquish that and realize that all that's required is love, it's all love, all of spirit is love, it is all good. Being able to integrate what I have now with what I've experienced in the past has given me freedom. I have to have the freedom to know that God does not have us in a pigeonhole, and he is not this little old man sitting up on the mount with the long hair and all of that. That is just not who God is. That's not who Source is. We are all one together. I still go to a church, not the one that my ex-husband pastored, of course, but my husband and I go to a church that we love. We love the people. We've been going there for years prior to this experience, coming into spirituality. The people are beautiful and lovely, and there are still so many beautiful lessons to learn about humanity and loving and serving one another, as I do believe Source shows that we should all be serving and loving one another. And then the stuff that doesn't resonate anymore, I just let it go and know that that's okay for everyone who wants to still have that experience. One of the things I loved when I first was getting to know Julie was I loved hearing how when she goes to services, she's sitting there and she's watching the spirit light show happening on the ceiling. And I was like, so I told Jeff, I said, that's what we're going to do. We're going to sit there and enjoy the spirit show whenever, if ever, there's something that, so did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. And you bring up a really good point. When I'm at Mass, and I go most weekends, and my eyes are closed during part of it, I'm sure people think, oh, she's so reverent. That's not it. I'm watching the show. I'm watching the energy of what's going on in there. Do you find that you are less apt now than you were, especially when you were ensconced in the religion thing? You're less apt to try and convince somebody of something, especially when it comes to religion or spirituality, because many religions especially will say, well, you have to believe this or you're not really a member, or you have to do it this way. And what have you found are you still surrounded by people? Do you have people in your life that this would just kind of make them blow a fuse?
Yes.
And how do you
Yes,
deal with
in
that?
fact,
Do you feel like you need to convince them of your experiences?
at this moment, I have my spiritual family that I have discovered through AAT, and then trickle down effect from all kinds of things with that. And then I have my blood family, my other children, who would not, sadly, they would all be worried about my salvation. They would all be worried if they knew this. What they know that I do, and my involvement in anything, is that I am working with friends who help me navigate the grief of my loss of David, and my mother and my father and my stepmother, brother, all of that. So they're very supportive that I have a group of friends that help me navigate my grief. I can't really, my personal life right now, I can't really. Source gave me the hugest gift in giving Jeff, my husband, an awakening as well. So we are in alignment and understanding. I have no desire to try and convince somebody at all, because I feel like anybody that is supposed to know is going to discover it the way Source drives the train. Candy was used to take me to Robin. Robin was used to take me to Julie. And it just, all of those things happened outside of my religious understandings. Now I get really excited about things and want to share. And I'm thankful again for the AAT group, because we can share amongst each other. I've blossomed and found other circles of spirituality groups and do some retreats and stuff like that where you get to share. And I'm thankful I get to share it with my husband. He, bless his heart, he wants to tell all the people that we go to church with how wrong they have it. But he wants to do it from a place of, but they would have so much joy if they just really knew. And I'm like, yes, and they have chosen this path that they're on for now, and it's not ours to go in. And we know, he knows this, it's just the fleshy part. If we were to try to present that to anybody that we actually really love, it's not going to be done in love in the same way. It would cause hurt, it would cause pain, it would cause my two other sons to just fret and worry about what was going to happen to me. So both of us tried to look at things like, is this loving? Is this going to come from a place of love, or is it from a place of, I got a point to prove? And then, of course, that's the carnal, fleshy person, the ego that wants to do that. So I love talking spirituality with others, and there have been quite a few times when, especially in meeting other people who have lost children, if you see that there's a tiny crack in the door of interest on their part, then I'll start shining the light in. But I wait until they show any sort of opening. But I have shared Julie Ryan's information hundreds of times in that way, with people who have lost and are, or have very sickly people right now. We've had at least 2 families who were open enough. They weren't part of our church experience, who were open enough to hear that there's not just nothing. Because so many people think that when you die, it's just curtain goes down, black lights out, and that's it. And when you're able to share that they're not gone, then people get interested. But as far as going out and trying to proselytize, if that's the right word, the spirituality or what I know now, I don't think that's coming from a place of love. I think it's coming from a place of almost ego, that is like, I got it right and you don't, kind of thing, if that makes sense.
It does. And you bring up a really good point about not only are the practice groups good for validating the information that you're receiving from spirit, but also it gives you a safe place to discuss this stuff without any judgment. Yes. And I know you've met one of your best friends who lives on the other side of the country, and you guys talk pretty much every day, don't you?
Yes, we talk every day using an app called Marco Polo, because we're on 3 different hour. I mean, our times are totally different, but we communicate every day using that app. But she and I met in Sedona when a group, there were like 10 of us who had all graduated AAT, met out there and did a retreat together. And now she and I go back to Sedona once or twice a year. It's the safety factor in these groups, the no judgment, the how can we help you? And even when each other have issues, like there are several AA team members right now whose families are going through some pretty hard things. And there have been some of our times when we spend the majority of an hour uplifting and working and navigating that space. And it's a safe space. And there are people who are sitting there like me, who like, I don't have anybody but my AAT family and the friends that have been made through that, that can fully understand the spiritual world. And I am so beyond grateful for the safety of that group. Nobody judges anybody for anything. I mean, there are people who come in there who are still very much entrenched in some of the religious beliefs, and they're almost embarrassed to say it. And we're all like, that's fine. That's your journey. Well, I mean, we're fully supportive of anyone's journey because no one's wrong.
Right.
Your journey is your truth. It's your journey. No one is wrong, which is a limiting belief I really had to let go of.
I know. It takes a while. And I told everybody this morning about Lisa Annabali's Living Wake. And, what a joy. And CB's the one that set it all up. I was telling him it was less than 24 hours. And
yeah, well, Lisa reached out to me. We had spent hours and hours and hours of time together in the different group sessions. And she messaged me and she said, because she came from the Right to Die state, and she said, I'm going to do this on Sunday. Would you please gather everybody so that I can say goodbye? And I just was so honored. And as Source works its magic, we all came together. And how many? There were like 60 or 70 of us. I can't remember.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking 50. It might have been more. Yeah.
It was just packed. And every single one of us got to say to her as much or as little as we wanted. And it was the most beautiful experience. And then the very next day, she slipped away, crossed the veil, and so many of us have had visits from her.
Yeah.
And it's just always beautiful and special. It was such a gift. She really gifted. I wish more of us could do something like that. If you know that you're going to pass away. Well, actually, I wish every single state had that right to die thing. But anyway, that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah. Well, and I think the 12 phases of transition in the walk to heaven and everything that we're going to cover here this afternoon is perhaps the most applicable for all of us. We're all going to lose a loved one. A lot of us have already. We're all going to be in that position ourselves. And what I find too, and CBC, if you agree with this, is when we have a loved one who's dying, especially the first time that we go through it with somebody who's really close, not only does our heartache and we just having a horrible emotional time in a lot of instances, but it makes us face our own mortality. And we think, I'm going to be there someday. And so,
honestly, the 12 phases though, and knowing exactly what happens has made me unafraid.
Me too.
I mean, I don't want to pass date, like a few more grandchildren to look forward to. And if it is today, I'm good. I'm not fearful at all. Yeah. And the 12 phases inside our practice sessions, frequently someone will know Well, sometimes they don't even know. They'll be like, I've got this friend. Can everybody check in? And we'll realize that that person is already starting to transition. And it is such a place of practicing how you're going to know the 12 phases. Because some of us literally see, I see like a number of, in my mind's eye, a number shows. And for others, they hear it spoken. And for others, it's just a knowing. So it is a place, because I don't know where else I would be able to practice that at all.
Right.
Like, I think I would have lost the art or the ability or whatever if I didn't have that group to practice those things with. Mm-hmm. The practice groups are invaluable for being able to really lean into everything that Julie is teaching and be able to hone it and continue to raise your vibe and have a place to just hear each other's, how they work, because we all work differently. And I have realized that the way some people, the way Source has given knowledge to some people, I didn't used to have, and little by little, some of it is trickling in. And I'm just like, whoop. And it's because of being able to be in the soup, so to speak, the AAT soup, where we're all just kind of stirring it around together and sharing with each other and encouraging each other. And it's phenomenal. The practice groups are a phenomenal place to grow after this particular weekend.
Right. Any last words of wisdom you want to share with everybody, and we'll let you go on to your party?
I am just thrilled that each of you are here. I think this is one of the most important decisions you've ever made, to gift this to yourself, to give yourself permission, like it's a self-permission, to tap into what you already have, what you already are. It is not, I know a lot of people are born more in tune from the beginning. But I know you've heard Julie's story. If you haven't read it, everyone knows she didn't start out as a woo-woo girl at all. Mm-mm. And she has learned, and now she is able to share with all of us. And this certainly was the furthest thing from my mind. And over time, it, like anything, I think I've heard you say, anybody can do the chopsticks on a piano. But unless you sit down and spend dedication and hours, you're not going to be able to play any more than that. And that's how I feel about the practice session. So definitely, I praise you for gifting yourself this opportunity. And I invite you to continue to grow in what you've gifted yourself by practicing with the AAT community. And if any, sometimes different people hear of different things as well. But I think that the practice is where the growth will happen and the encouragement. So just encourage yourselves. Give yourself that gift.
Yep. And I've told him that we get together on the first Saturday of the month too. And that's always a blast.
It's a blast. And it's just, there's never a dull moment. You always bring, Source, Spirit always gives you some topic, and then it just it reverberates, and it's beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Well, put your party hat on. It's probably a tiara, since you're all dolled up. And have a wonderful time. Give my love to Jeff. And thank you for fitting us into your schedule.
Thank you for having me. I'm truly honored.
Okay. Bye, honey.
Bye.
All right. Let's get the screen back up here. I'm so proud of myself that I know how to do this. When we were coming back on after the break, I said to Lauren, aren't you proud of me? She goes, yeah, I'm really proud. I said, good, because I'm proud of myself too with all this techno stuff. So I think the 12 phases of transition and all of this in talking with Spirit is probably the most important thing that you'll learn from all of this, because we're all going to use it. And it's a transfer, again, of energy from me to you guys. This is not about technique. This is not about right or wrong. This is going to be 10%, if that, technique. but the rest of it is a transfer of energy. What you've heard Rose this morning and now CB just now say, go sit in the vibe. That's the key. That's all you have to do. And what you're going to find is it's going to come into you. Be able to receive. Let spirit work through you and with you. Don't have to try to do anything. Try, like Yoda says, you could do or you could not do, but try doesn't exist. And this is the way that all of this works too. So it's a transfer of energy. This information about spirits and loved ones and communicating with the spirit world, it's ancient. It's been around since the beginning of time. Certainly mythology is all based in that. It's in all the holy scriptures. Doesn't matter what kind of faith, what kind of tradition, it's all there. They're all saying the same thing. We're just saying it perhaps in a different way. It's in all religions, for heaven's sakes. Again, we're all saying the same thing. It's just a different flavor. They all talk about angels. Most of them talk about saints, deceased loved ones, elders. When I was growing up, my mother and both of my grandmothers, when they lost something, they would say a prayer to Saint Anthony. Tony, look around, something's lost and must be found. And inevitably they would find whatever it is they were missing. And I know that this prayer is said in a multitude of ways in every language. I've heard from people, they'll tell me the prayer in French and it has a little bit of a different translation, but it's all the same thing. And what we were talking about earlier, Gertrude and I, with our mutual friend Perdita Finn, she has this checklist every morning that she gives her deceased loved ones and the saints and the angels and God. They're like, okay, I need you to do this. I need you to do that. Can you help me with this? And it works great. All indigenous cultures talk about their elders. They talk about the spirits. They are, smoking the peace pipe and doing the drumming ceremonies and stuff like that. What are they doing? They're raising the vibration to be able to communicate with spirit. Spirit animals are a really big deal to a lot of people. We have guides that can be spirit animals. Some of us consider our pets to be spirit animals, and they give us peace and comfort, and sometimes it's like we're communicating with them telepathically, and people say, oh, I'm just losing my mind. You're not losing your mind. You're communicating with them telepathically. This is in all of the literature, all the literature that since the beginning of time again. Plato's Republic, Shakespeare's King Lear. Perhaps the most common one is The Christmas Carol by Dickens, the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. It's throughout all literature, again, since the beginning of time. Little children are very good at communicating with spirit because, again, we all come in with the ability. It's just that when at about an average age of 7, little children are told, oh, honey, you don't really have an imaginary friend. That's just your imagination. They're not really there. And the child is saying, no, but he really is. My friend Stanley is really there. Well, the adults can't see Stanley, but this little kid can see Stanley. And that's how my 4 children's books came about. Over the years, I've had so many mothers and grandmothers say to me, can you please write a book about something that I can read to my child that will explain how they can see spirits even though I can't? Because my child knows information about my deceased grandmother who's been dead for 20 years before my child was born. And all this information is accurate that this kid who'd never met my grandmother, this kid knows. And then I got a lot of, how do I explain to my child that they know all this information about past lives? And we can validate it with historic documents online. If this kid can't read yet, how do we know that? And then how do we explain to a child what's happening when a loved one passes? because we may be at the funeral home and we say, well, honey, grandma's in heaven now. And he says, no, she's not. She's asleep in that box up there in the front of the room. How do we explain that? And so that's where my children's books came in. And those were all divinely guided as well. I, of course, checked in with Pope Clement. I said, am I supposed to write a children's book? And he goes, yeah. He says that a lot to me. And I said, all right. And so I was thinking about it for a few days. And then I had a client that came on, and she is a woman who worked at PBS for 20 years, and she advised on Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, and she's a psychologist, and Comfy Couch and a bunch of other well-known shows that we would know from PBS. And now she's head of all global learning for Google. And I said, well, I'm being led to write a children's book. And she said, oh, great. Send me the manuscript. I'll proof it for you. And I'll, if anything needs tweaking to be sure that the kids understand what you're trying to convey, we'll do that. She's been my consultant on all 4 of my books. So I write the manuscript. I get the illustrations done. I send them to her. She will make a few tweaks if needed. And then I send it to my editor. So again, all this information comes in. I have found that when we're led, all the pieces of the puzzle show up at the exact right time, and all the people show up when we need it. I had talked to her on the way to Chicago. I was going to visit my brother. Got there, we had dinner, and the dinner conversation was with a couple of women that were guests at the dinner, and they talked about how they lost a sibling when they were young, and there were a bunch of adults in the room, but they were all wailing. They couldn't explain to this child what was happening. They heard, well, your brother's in heaven now. Well, to a 4-year-old, what's that mean? And I thought, okay, that's another sign. And then the third thing was I was laying in bed the next morning before I got up. My husband had already gotten up to have breakfast, and I heard angel messages for kids. So of course, I'm a businesswoman. I'm on my phone, laying in bed, checking to see if I can trademark angel messages and checking to see if the domain name is available. And both were. And I said, all right. So I sent an email to my patent and trademark attorney. And I said, trademark this angel messages name before I got out of bed. And that's how it happens. You're led. You'll have a thought. You act on it. You get another thought. You act on it. And that's how spirit guides us. So little children know this stuff. Have any of you experienced that with one of your children or perhaps a grandchild where they know something about a past event or about a loved one who's departed that they haven't even ever met? They all do. We all come in with the hardware.
Santa, oh. That's right, but I don't know how you know that. That's right, that there is a kitty up there, but I don't know how you know that. How do you know that, Charles? How do you know that?
Okay, this baby who still speaks half English, half Martian, can't really talk in sentences yet. She knew that the ashes of her grandmother's cat were up on the shelf. And grandma kept saying, how do you know that? This is one of my clients who sent me this video of her grandbaby Charlie. I think it's a great example of how little children know this stuff. Animals communicate spiritually with one another in the death process. Wild horses, there's been many studies done on wild horses, and they do this thing called breathing air when one of the horses in their herd is dying. And they all come up one by one, and they put their nozzles right up next to the horse that's dying, and they breathe the same air. And it's something that's a ritual that they go through that is kind of like a goodbye. I recognize you, goodbye, have a wonderful journey into the afterlife. Had any of you heard about that? It's called breathing air with wild horses. You can look it up. It's a thing. Chris Kerr is a director. He's a doctor. He's an MD, PhD, and he's he is the director of a huge hospice organization in Buffalo, New York. And they will take care of anywhere between 1,200 and 1,500 patients a day. And they are in nursing homes, and they're in homes, individual homes, and they're in hospitals. And his staff does that in Buffalo. So I had him on my show, and here's what he had to say about his research.
What it was medically is people described cases or observations, but they didn't put any real rigor behind it. By that, I mean using a validated instrument and ruling out for things like confusion. So we did that. And what we did is we asked people with this questionnaire every day leading up to death by several weeks to months. And the questions were really basically, are you having dreams? Yes, no. Are they feel real on a scale of 0 to 10? What were you dreaming about, etc.? So we tried to standardize the questions. And what we found in our first study was the vast majority of people, roughly 88% of people, were having at least one of these experiences. And there were some very common themes. Among them was that the degree of realism was about 10 out of 10. So these felt virtual. And one of the things we hear most often is, no, I don't normally dream, or you don't understand, this wasn't just a dream. So realism was key. About 85% were extremely comforting. And the ones that were not comforting, though, were extremely valuable for other reasons, which we can talk about. The frequency of these experiences increased as people approached death. And then when we looked at content, what was fascinating was that as you got closer to death, you were more like, the content was mostly likely to be of people who you loved and lost. And what was interesting in that is that when we measured comfort, so what content theme provided the most comfort, seeing deceased loved ones provided the most comfort, as opposed to, let's say, travel. So there's this built-in mechanism as people approach death that they're having increasing frequency of these experiences. They're overwhelmingly comforting, and they're most frequently dreaming of people who they've loved and lost. Some other really interesting things, very little is said between the person who's in the dream and the dreamer, but everything seems to be understood or intuited. They don't come out of these experiences with questions, kind of in a therapeutic way, like wonder what this metaphor means. It just seems to be understood. There's this editing process where the people who loved us best or unconditionally or nurtured us, secured us, those are the ones who are prevalent, and the people who withheld or conditioned loved are omitted. So it often comes down to these very critical, pivotal relationships. Time seems to be irrelevant. So 95-year-old men can smell the perfume of their mother who they lost when they were 5. So there's this connectivity within our life going back to whomever cherished us. And that's what comes back, and that's what's soothing. And definitely the fear of death diminishes. We also have done a bunch of studies, some other interesting studies. One we did looking at death as a traumatic experiences and looking at measures of post-traumatic growth, and people who were having these experiences actually gained insight and understanding even as they're approaching death. So it's more than a feel-good thing. They're actually gaining ground. And which goes to this paradox of dying. You're physically lessening, but emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, you're actually very much alive and vibrant.
Okay, so that is an interesting interview. You'll have links in their resource materials when you get them. And university-based research that Chris has done shows 90% of people at the end of their lives see the spirits of deceased loved ones in pets, either in visions or dreams. And I've done university-based research for my surgical device inventions in order to get them approved to sell in America and in other countries. It's the FDA here. It's similar agencies in other countries. It is not easy to get your research project approved by the Institutional Review Board. at a university in particular. It's very difficult. So in the interview, and again, you guys will have a link to it, I asked him that and he laughed. He said, I haven't had anybody ever ask me that, but you're right. It's really hard to do. So I think that gives credibility. He says end of life care is an assembly line of the absurd as far as he's concerned with physicians. It's crazy how they do all these tests and all this stuff to prolong somebody's life who obviously is trying to pass. And it's just craziness. So I think you'll learn a lot if you take the time to listen to that interview and enjoy it a lot too. In Paradisum is a Gregorian chant that's said at the end of every Catholic funeral. I'd heard it a bazillion times before my mother died. And I saw it in a different light, of course, perspective being everything, because it talks about in paradisum means into paradise in Latin. And it talks about how the angels and your loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise. Well, certainly that's what I saw with my mother. I never paid attention to that prayer before, but boy, do I now. And so when I was writing Angelic Attendants, I thought, I just want to see, I was led, you can tell I live in the South. I was led, darling. That's what they say down here. I was led to do some research just to find out where this prayer originated. And what I learned was it began as a 5th century Gregorian chant. And I thought, okay, well, maybe it took till the 5th century till someone was well educated enough that they could read and write down what everybody saw, I think, back in that time, I believe. And certainly some of the most learned people were men living in monasteries and synagogues. And I believe that's what's going on within Paradisum. Let's talk about the 12 phases of transition. We're going to go through these quickly because most of you have read the book, or if you haven't, I think you probably will, hopefully soon. So phase 1, spirit exits the body through the top of the head, hangs on like a cartoon caption bubble where the words to the character are. I can always tell if somebody's in one of the 12 phases, even if they've begun, because the spirit's out of the body. Now, remember, we learned this morning that the spirit is the power source for the body. So you may have heard me say on my show, when somebody is in the 12 phases of transition and their spirit's out of their body, I am unable to scan them like a human MRI. It would be the equivalent of my looking at them and looking at their x-rays in a pitch black room without any electricity. The power source isn't there. I will sometimes see the spirit kind of go in and out of the body, and kind of like whack-a-mole, that game where you hit the mole or the little gopher when he comes up with a mallet. So that's phase 1. Phase 2, the parents arrive. The mother is always the first one to arrive, the maternal spirit. If the person who's dying, if their mother's still alive, it'll be their maternal grandmother. If she's still alive, it will be her mother. It's always on the maternal side. Interesting point about that is in Judaism, especially, a child is not considered Jewish unless the Jewish mother births that child. And that's why you'll see if there's a Gentile woman perhaps marrying into a Jewish family, a lot of the times she'll convert if they want the child raised in the Jewish religion. So it goes way beyond just religion. It goes way beyond history. I find that the interesting thing about the maternal spirit running the show from the spirit world is I thought God had like maybe a department in heaven that when somebody was dying, he would dispatch angels or somebody to help with the transition process. But boy, it is the maternal spirit. She brings in the other spirits. She brings in the angels. She is running the show from the spirit world. And then the paternal spirit comes in. If the person's father is deceased, it will be him. If the father's still alive, it'll be the maternal grandfather, and on and on. So that's how it goes. It's always on the maternal line. And then the mother spirit brings in the angels, and they form a circle with the parents anchoring that circle. Now, the interesting thing about this too is that the M is for mother and the F is for the father in my graph. And the left side of the body in Kabbalah, and I studied Kabbalah for several years, Kabbalistic healing, that's Jewish mysticism. As a good Catholic girl, I studied Jewish mysticism because Jesus studied it. And that's what helped him perform his miracles, in addition to the fact that he was God, if you believe that. So the maternal spirit's always on the left side because that's the feminine energy. The paternal energy is always on the right side, the male energy. Back to the angels. Angels look to me like they're depicted in the paintings and in the statuary, in the Christian church. I was raised that angels look like this: big wings, big entities, white gown, belted at the rope, barefoot. Is that what angels really look like? Who knows? To somebody growing up in an indigenous culture in the middle of the Amazon, maybe it's a ball of purple energy. That's how it's depicted to me, so I can recognize what the energy is. We're always going to get communication from spirit in a way that it resonates with us based on what our life experiences are. I was raised, this is how angels look, this is how I perceive them. Phase 4, the circle starts to open up. Of course, you'll get the chart of all of these phases of transition in your resource materials tomorrow. And there is a chart with all 12 phases on my website. Go to the 12 phases page, askjulieryan.com. I tell people download the chart, save it on your phone, because when you have a loved one who's at the end of their lives, then you can just ask, what phase is my grandmother in? And you'll hear a number, and then you can refer to the chart. Why that's handy is because as somebody is progressing through the phases, if it's in short order and people want to come be with that person before they pass, it's like insider information. You have information that can help you with that. And you can say, okay, well, yeah, my grandmother's progressing pretty quickly. So if you want to see her, come on in. Or you can get somebody on the FaceTime or on a Zoom or something like that to say goodbye. That happens a lot and it works well. The other thing is when people are dying and the loved ones want to be with them, their loved ones have to take time off work. Sometimes they have to travel far distances. They're coming in from another city or perhaps even a different country. And this just really gives you a guide to what's going on. Phase 6, other spirits arrive. They appear to me in period dress, and that's interesting. The S is for spouse. If the person who's dying has a spouse in spirit, they're going to be in that position. I always say it's southeast. As I'm looking at the person who's dying, it's southeast to the maternal spirit. And if they have multiple spouses, the most recent one is going to be closest to the maternal spirit, and then they're going to go out in next to each other. So Zsa Zsa Gabor, I think, had 8 husbands. So all eight of her husband's spirits were there, and they are lined up in the order that she was married to him, which I think is a riot with that. These spirits, it's really interesting when they show up in different period dress. I may see somebody from this time period. I see them from all different walks of life, all countries, different dress from lots of different areas of the world. I may see somebody in Renaissance dress. I may see somebody from the 1960s who's got go-go boots and a mini skirt on, like Twiggy or somebody like that, looking like that. So it's always interesting how they show up. And most of the time I can describe loved ones, family members that are there. And then the family recognizes, oh, that's Uncle Artie, or that's my cousin Sylvie who died when she was 2, or those kinds of details. Phase 7, a lot of pet lovers love this because the animal spirits start to arrive. And they're always as I'm looking at the person who's dying, they're always on the right side, right behind the row of angels. And I call that the dog pound, although that's where all animals go. So they can be pets that you had during your life. They can be farm animals That's really fun when I see farm animals, and I'll say, was your grandmother, did she grow up on a farm, or does she live on a farm now? And they'll say, yeah. And then I'll describe what the dogs and cats and cows and sheep and pigs and all that stuff. And they'll say, yeah, that's Bessie, her cow, and that's Trigger, her horse, or whatever. I had a client recently who we were having a conversation with her deceased dad in heaven, and I think his horse's name was Hercules, and he had Hercules for 30 years, I believe. And Hercules showed up, and he could see Hercules' spirit. And he kept saying, okay, Herc, I know you're here to get me, but, I'm not ready yet. I need a few more days. And he kept talking to this horse. And my client said, yeah, and then I read your book, and then it made sense to me. She goes, I just thought he was delirious. And that's the thing, is that as Dr. Kerr says, people can see their deceased loved ones and pets, 90% of people at the end of their lives. So when before we always thought, oh, grandma's just hallucinating, it's the morphine. No, grandma can really see these spirits that are there because they have one foot in the spirit world and one foot still in this reality. Because remember, their spirit's pretty much out of their body, but it's still attached onto the top of the head. Phase 8, horseshoe expands, more and more spirits are coming in, and I call them the Welcome to Heaven Committee. And as that horseshoe continues to expand and more spirits arrive, phase 9 is when things really begin to happen. Phase 6 is when these additional angels show up on either side of the spirit bubble. And when this happened with my mother, I thought, this is going to be interesting. I don't know what these angels are going to do, but I know they're going to have a pivotal role in my mother's passing. And it was an interesting experience for me. The first time I saw this with my mother was because my heart was breaking because I was losing my mother, kind of what CB was saying. And yet at the same time, I was watching this amazing stuff happening in the spirit world. And it gave me this enormous sense of comfort and wonder of, wow, what's going to happen next? And of course, that's depicted in the book. When spirits arrive, there are multitudes of them. I mean, thousands of them. And it's as if when my mother was dying, she was in a hospice facility, a standalone hospice facility. And it was like the wall behind her bed was there, but the walls on the side and the wall straight out left. There were so many spirits, they looked like dots on the horizon. And it was thousands and thousands and thousands of spirits. Those spirits, I believe, were a part of her life in many past lives. They're not just loved ones from this lifetime. Those usually show up front from this lifetime just so that we can describe them and give the family some comfort. But it's remarkable how many spirits show up. Between phase 9 and phase 10, the angels on either side of the spirit bubble, their wings begin to move. And it causes an upward lift. It causes a vortex. It reminds me of driving through the car wash. At the end, they turn on the dryer and it sucks all the water off your car before you exit the car wash. And when that happened with my mother, again, I thought, okay, what's this? What's going to happen next? And I've experienced it with thousands of people that I've scanned over the years since that time. There's a hole that opens too above the head, and the vortex is coming out of that hole. And that's going to help the body and the spirit separate. It's going to help the spirit evacuate from the body. And as I was going through this with my mother, I thought, God, Ryan, are you just losing your mind? I mean, what is this? And then, here we are all those years later, because she died in 2002. And that's where we are. The vortex was formed, as I mentioned, by angels' wings. And it reminded me of a giant owl. If you've ever seen a documentary on an owl, their flight is silent, but they have this enormous wingspan. And you can almost feel the drag of their wings moving. And it I knew there was some part. I knew it played some role because I kept thinking, this is like a giant owl. And the wings of a giant owl remind me of what I'm watching these angels do. And I knew that the angels' wings moving was causing this vortex. Little did I know until I researched it. I was led to just do an internet search on, I think what I put in was Vortex owl wings. And here's what I got. There's this thing called a wingtip vortex. It is an aeronautical engineering feat that causes lift. Every plane, every jet, every bug, every kite, anything that flies, every bird, there's a vortex that forms underneath each wing and it causes lift. If you do an internet search on wingtip vortex, you will see probably hundreds of thousands of aeronautical engineering drawings, of articles, of documentaries, of stuff like that about the wingtip vortex. And I thought, okay, this is interesting because I'm watching something happen from these angels in the spirit world, that the movement of their wings is causing this vortex to form that I can see, I can feel, I can hear. And now there's an aeronautical engineering explanation for it. I call this is when science catches up with woo-woo. And was I led to learn this? Absolutely. When I went in search of this. And I have a dear friend who also is a graduate, Deborah, of this class, and she married a retired commercial airline pilot. And we've had many discussions about the wingtip vortex because he used to fly the great big, huge international, planes, like, I don't even know what they're called, the great big ones that would fly internationally. He said, oh yeah, he said every pilot is taught at length about the wingtip vortex. This was my favorite. This was done for an air show. A little pyrotechnical assistance here, but aren't these angels fabulous? What they did was they exploded inside the wingtip vortex, that plane that's heading towards us, released their explosives, and it caused these angels out of the wingtip vortex, which is one of my favorite photographs, over the ocean, no less. So that's fun. Phase 11, when you see or you understand that the angels are in a straight line, we know the end is near. We know that they're getting ready to lift off. And certainly there are lots of stories in the book about, somebody being in phase 11 and the room is very bright. There's a swirl that's going on in the room. CB told you she could feel it and also see it. I had a client recently tell me that she and her husband were with her mother-in-law at the end of her life on the day that she passed. And she said it was like a tornado in their house. She said they could see lampshades shaking, they could see chandeliers moving, there was a rattling of things. And she said, we looked at each other and thought, what the heck is this? She and her husband both could feel it. They couldn't see it so much. They could see the result of it. And so we were talking about it. I said, well, that was the vortex that was being formed by the angel's wings. And she said, and then when her mother-in-law took her last breath, within about 30 seconds, all that shaking, she said it was a cross between like having a tornado and an earthquake in her house, the shaking like an earthquake. And she said within maybe 30 seconds of her mother-in-law's last breath, she said it stopped. And I said, was anything in disarray after that time? And she said, no. She said, had my husband not been with me, I just figured I would have been losing my mind or something. But she said, he's not interested in woo-woo at all, but we both witnessed that at the same time. That's the first time I've heard somebody talk about it in that kind of detail, where there really was so much force in the room that it was moving material things in this lifetime. And then the spirit exits through the top of the head and is escorted to heaven by angels. I originally was going to call the book Angelic Escorts, and my son Jonathan said, "Oh, you can't call it that because it sounds like a hooker service." Angelic Escorts. So I said, okay. So that's why I came up with Angelic Attendants. But it's really that we're all escorted to heaven. And heaven, as I perceive it, is always up and to the right, which is interesting because when you look at the old masters' paintings of somebody dying, they always go up and to the right. And I always thought, what the heck's that all about? Well, I was a guest speaker at a Helping Parents Heal conference a couple of years ago, and there was a physicist in the room, and he came up to me after my talk, especially with this slide, and he said, well, you know, when you're unscrewing something because you're trying to lift it off, the way that the vortex is spinning, it's going to spin up and to the right. When you take your lid off, you know, you're unscrewing it and it comes up and to the right. He said, that's what's going on. I said, okay, great. That's when science catches up with woo-woo again. So I think that's amazing. Okay, so I had this darling young gal named Chloe call into my show. And she had just lost her granddad. And he had Alzheimer's. And her grandmother was just beside herself because he had died the night that the grandmother had put him into a Alzheimer's nursing home, you know, a lockdown unit. So Chloe wanted to know if I had anything that the grandfather could tell the grandmother to console her.
I talked to you a little bit ago, earlier this summer, about my grandpa. He was in phase 9. He ended up transitioning in July. And so I'm actually calling in for my grandma. She just needs some reassurance that he isn't resentful to her or anything. I've tried to reassure her. I've given her your book. Your book helped her a lot, but she just still has, you know, doubts that he's okay, because he ended up passing the night she put him in a home. And which we had talked about when I talked to you last, that having Alzheimer's, a lot of times they do pass once their partner's ready to let go. And that's exactly what happened. But I was just wondering if you could connect with him and if he has a message for my grandma.
Sure. Chloe, what's his first name? Remind me of his first name.
Gary.
Gary. Okay. All right. He's on your right. As soon as you started talking about him, you know, they come right in. Our heads are big satellite dishes that receive and transmit frequencies, and every spirit has a frequency they keep throughout all their lifetime. So he's on your right. Gary, what do you want to tell Kathy? She's suffering because she feels guilty that she put him in that home and then he died.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's saying it was perfect. He's saying he didn't want her to have to go through any extra steps with him dying in the house. He's saying it would have been more complicated had he died at home.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So he wanted to make it easy for your grandmother and for the family. And he said that's where the professionals were. They're used to dealing with stuff like that. And he just didn't want her to have to go through that and the rest of the family. So, Gary, are you mad at Kathy? He said, oh, heavens, no. There's no reason to be mad. And he's showing me a single daisy with white petals and a yellow center for you to give to her. So
okay,
go find a daisy. Good luck with that this time of year. But he wants you to give her a daisy for him. Look up the significance of daisies. There's some kind of spiritual meaning there. And ask your grandmother if maybe daisies are one of her favorite flowers, or what's the deal with the daisy. And it's not a bouquet of daisies, it's one daisy. Okay, so we released the show. We taped this. We do tape the call-in show. Now we do it live on YouTube. We do a live stream on YouTube too. But at that point, we tape the show, goes into editing. We release it really early Friday morning on all the YouTube and all the podcast networks. Well, I got up and it's released at like 6 a.m. Eastern. So I get up, I'm in Central Time, and I'm scrolling through my emails early in the day, and I got a note that somebody had put a comment on the YouTube page, and she said, this woman, I don't know who she was. I didn't know Chloe, didn't know her grandfather, didn't know her grandmother. And this woman said, on your show last night, the grandfather with the daisy, he's talking about the song, A Daisy a Day.
He remembers the first time he met her. He remembers the first thing she said. He remembers the first time he held her on the night that they said they'd be wed. He remembers her sweet way of saying, honey, has something gone wrong? He remembers the fun and the teasing and the reason he wrote her this song. I'll give you a daisy a day, dear. I'll give you a daisy a day. I love you until the rivers run still and the four winds we know blow away. Now they'd walk down the street in the evening, and for years I would see them go by. For their love, it was more than the clothes that they wore could be seen in the gleam of their eyes. As a kid, they would take me for candy, and I'd love to go tagging along. We'd hold hands while we'd walk to the corner. Then the old man would sing her his song. I'll give you a daisy a day, dear. I'll give you a daisy a day. I'll love you until the rivers run still and the four winds we know blow away. Now he walks down the street in the evening, and he stops by the old candy store, and I somehow believe he's believing that he's holding her hand like before, for he feels all her love walking with him, and he smiles at the things she might say. Then the old man goes up to the hilltop, and he gives her a daisy a day. I'll give you a daisy a day, dear. I'll give you a daisy a day. I love you until the rivers run still and the four winds we know blow away.
So it turns out that song was released over 50 years ago when her grandfather and grandmother were probably in their 30s, perhaps early 30s. And she emailed me afterwards because I sent her this song. And she emailed me later in the day, Chloe, the gal that called into my show, and she said, that was their special song, my grandparents. She said, I'd never heard of it. I wasn't familiar with it. And hello, you can't make this stuff up, first of all. Secondly, think about this. Think about all the synchronicities that happened here. A gal I don't know calls into my show. We're talking with her grandfather, who I didn't know, his spirit. He tells her to take his wife a single daisy, from him as a gift. It's going to mean something to the grandma. We don't know what that is, but when we get guidance from spirit, we're led to follow it. We want to take action. So then this woman listens to the show very early the next morning, leaves a comment, talks about this Give Her a Daisy a Day song or a Daisy a Day song that was 50 some years old. I look it up online and I find this video that you guys just watched. And the whole meaning of the video is this man gives his wife a daisy a day. Even when she's dead, he takes a daisy a day to her in the cemetery. And I was able to share that with the family. I think this is a great example of how spirit works together with all of us, and back to expect the people you need to show up when you need them. Expect the circumstances to show up when you need them. Ask for guidance. Chloe called in, she was asking for guidance. We got it from her grandmother in a way that was completely out of the range of anything that I ever thought of, and yet magical and spiritual and fabulous. And how much comfort did that bring, not only to Chloe, but to her grandmother, because that was so specific, and to everybody that watched that show, because I talked about it in the next week's episode. And I said, you guys aren't going to believe this, but here's what happened. So I think it's a wonderful example of how we can trust when we get guidance from spirit. We don't know how it's going to unfold. We don't know who's going to be involved when we're getting the answers. Be open to how it's interpreted. Take her a daisy a day. I thought, well, let's look up the spiritual meaning of daisies. Had no idea how poignant this would be to Chloe's grandmother, and it means so much both to her and her husband. When I'm talking with people and their deceased loved ones, and the loved one will say, okay, look for the ladybug, or look for a peacock, or look for, one was a ballerina. Recently, a woman called into the show and her daughter had passed, and she said, can she give me a sign or something to let me know she's around me? And I said, she's telling you to look for the ballerina. Does that mean anything? Was she a ballerina? What was going on? She said, no, I don't know anything about that. And I said, okay. I said, well, when spirit gives us information, it may make sense to us at the moment that we hear it or receive it. It may make sense later when we think about it. It may make sense later in a few days or weeks or months because it pertains to something that hasn't happened yet. So back to the woman with the ballerina, I said, just be open. You may see a pin, you may see a ballerina in a magazine, you may see a ballerina figure, you may see a doll, just be open. She emailed me about a week later and she said, the morning after I talked to you on your show, I went to London. I flew to London. And she said, the next day I was walking in London and I passed the Royal Albert Theatre. And on the top of the dome of the Royal Albert Theatre is a gold ballerina statue. And she said, I knew instantly that was a message from my daughter. And I said, that was a serious ballerina message. But great example again. And, I have thousands of them, of spirit giving us information where it doesn't make sense right away, but it does later. I think the daisy's a great example of that. Okay, we've got a few minutes left before our first afternoon break. Does anybody have any questions on any of this? Anybody? Raise your hand and Lauren will help us. Okay, Ping.
Can you tell me, my mom died before 1991, and my mom tell me anything?
Can your mom tell you anything? Let's save that for the practicum for a little bit later, Ping.
Okay, thank you.
And also, can you move your camera? I can just see the very top of your head. There you go.
Sorry, I have two computers. I'm relaxed on the bigger ball. That's
okay, good.
Okay.
That's all right.
Thank you.
You don't have to stand up, but yeah. But let's talk to
Okay.
your mom in the practice session a little bit later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Stephen.
I'm wondering, is any is it possible that any part of a transition of the 12 can be during stages of Alzheimer's or dementia?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, while they're still living and moving around, and then they go into another world and nobody understands where they're at, and so they're housed and locked up and whatever.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing that's really important to remember is time doesn't exist in the spirit world. Remember, Dr. Kerr says that his research shows that too. And since time doesn't exist in the spirit world, everybody goes through the 12 phases regardless of how they pass. It can happen very instantly, like in the case of a homicide or a suicide, or it can take days, weeks, months, even years. I had a woman call into my show for 2 years whose father had Alzheimer's, and it took him 2.5 years. He was in phase 11 for 2.5 years. And so, yes, time doesn't exist in the spirit world. And I think that brings up a really interesting point too, one that really became an issue during COVID, because so many people weren't able to be with their loved ones who were in the hospital when they were dying at the end of their lives. And they really suffer a lot of guilt because they couldn't be with their whomever at the end of their lives. And the bottom line is everybody's surrounded by angels and the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets. Nobody dies alone. And I've found through the years that gives people a lot of comfort knowing that. So yes, you can be up walking around and you're hit by a bus and you die instantly. You go through the 12 phases in an instant. So yes, it can take long periods of time, or it can help it. It can just transform instantly. Does that answer your question?
It does. Well, I think it explains a lot of what, we see and hear and so much confusion about.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is people are so afraid to die too. And when we're with a loved one at the end of their lives, we're facing our own mortality and we're worried about, oh my God, what's going to happen to this loved one? And then, oh my God, what's going to happen to me when I'm in that position? Because I'm going to be there someday. That's one thing we never get out of. So yeah, great question. All righty. Let's take a break. I've only got a minute left. So let's go ahead and go to break. We're coming back at 3:45.